Okay, good evening, everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome to our Jamboree History Talks and the first event of 2025. We're so excited to have all of you joining us today. I think we're just shocked that we have so many people, but we're honestly so excited to see this room so full. Never seen it like this before. My name is Olivia, and I'm the museum assistant for the Lacey Museum. I'm also joined by Associate Curator Felicia, who is moderating the virtual part of the presentation. Yeah, okay. Sorry, is that better? No? Any better? Oh, is it? Okay, I'll try a bit louder. Is it any better? 40 years ago. No? Okay. So Felicia's going to be moderating the virtual part of the presentation at the back of the room. We are delighted to have educator and freelance writer Rebecca Sanchez with us for tonight's talk. She is going to be sharing her research on the story of the Evergreen Ballroom, the once extremely popular music venue that used to be here in Lacey. As some of you know, we actually do have a small section on the Evergreen Ballroom in our entertainment exhibit at the museum, and we are hoping to expand on this when we reopen in our new space. When creating exhibits, we love to learn from our community members, and we always enjoy hearing your stories. So if you do have any memories that you want to share with us about your own experiences at the Evergreen Ballroom, please feel free to email us at laceymuseum@cityoflacey.org. The museum email is currently on the top left of the screen, and we will have that slide back at the end of the presentation if you don't have time to take note of it now. And if you do want to share with us, we would really appreciate that, and we'd be really excited to read about your experiences. For those of you here in person, if you haven't already, we'd really appreciate if you would sign in after the conclusion of tonight's presentation, as this helps us to get an accurate count of attendance. You can also use that form to sign up for our newsletter, and we will be keeping you posted about current updates. Before we begin tonight's presentation, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement and some recent museum news. The Lacey Museum is on the ancestral land of the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek, including the Nisqually Indian tribe and Squaxin Island tribe. We acknowledge and remember those tribal people not recognized today who were absorbed or relocated into other tribes for survival. We recognize the ancestors and the descendants who are still here. We recognize and respect the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek as the traditional stewards of this land since time immemorial, and their role today in taking care of these lands in perpetuity. We recognize and have the responsibility to call attention to the histories of dispossession, forced removal, and abridged treaty rights that allowed our nation, state, and city to develop as they have today. We recommend that community members read the Medicine Creek Treaty of 1854. Sounds like it's got a bit louder, right? That's good. Many of you have probably already heard the exciting news at this point, but if you haven't, the Lacey Museum is moving location. The current museum, located in the Russell House on Lacey Street, closed last year now in November, and the museum will reopen its new location on 6th Avenue at the Belltown Center sometime this year, and we will let you know as soon as we have a more specific opening date. So stay tuned. We are very excited for you to eventually see what we've been working on. The existing museum location is still going to be in operation, but this will become a dedicated research center where people can explore the museum library, archives, subject files, genealogy collections, and more. We also hope you'll join us next month for a history talk with our museum curator, Erin Quinn Voucho. For the very first time, she is going to be revealing the mysterious past of the local and prominent historical figure, O.C. Lacey. We are extremely excited to hear all about her research, and we will be learning more about the mystery behind the man who left his name on the Lacey post office. So please join us next month, because we are very excited for that. Now, for tonight's presentation, we will hold our Q&A section at the end, and we'll do our best to get questions from both our in-person and our online attendees. For those of you online, if you have any questions for Rebecca during the presentation, feel free to submit them in the Q&A button. It is located at the bottom of your screen. For those of you in person, I will be walking around with a microphone so those watching live online can also hear you from the audience. Before we begin, I would like to introduce tonight's speaker, Rebecca Sanchez. Rebecca Sanchez holds a bachelor's in secondary education English composition and a master's in language and literary acquisition. Her published writing encompasses history topics, travel destinations, and people's stories. In addition to covering Thurston County history and human interest stories on Thurston Talk, she has published work in Northwest Travel and Life magazine, in magazines in Texas and Oklahoma, and in her own travel blog. When she is not in the classroom teaching language arts, she is traveling to write about and photograph the unique and historical locations that she visits. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Rebecca. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you, Lacey Museum, for hosting the event and for inviting me to share the research from the history articles that I wrote. Why does the Evergreen Ballroom story and experience stand out? Well, from the research that I did, I saw an immigrant story, I saw the story of opportunity, the story of youth, and the story of diversity in Thurston County. Curious, how many of you in the audience had been to the Evergreen Ballroom? Great. So who am I to tell about the story and to share the research? Well, again, I'm an English teacher, and I'm also a freelance writer. So perhaps the PowerPoint might incline you to want to take notes or sit back and hear a story. But I started this for a series of articles for Thurston Talk that were going to focus on the history of the ballroom and those who had played there and the events that happened. In this presentation, we'll go over whose vision the ballroom was, what effect it had, and what its legacy is. The research that I did was varied, a variety of sources. I interviewed a number of local people. I interviewed Bill Englehart of Little Bill and the Blue Notes, Steve Bean, a former employee, KGY, brief conversation with Dick Poost as I started the research, the late Ken Balsley. I consulted History Link article by Peter Blecha, who also wrote about many Pacific Northwest bands. I spent some time with the PacificNorthwestBands.com website created by Sam Carlson. Sources such as Ancestry.com, newspapers.com, the Washington State Library, Washington State Historical Society, Washington State Archives, and of course, newspaper access through the State Library. And the research inevitably filters through my lens and what my purpose was. My purpose was twofold: to create history articles, one, for people who might have been new to Lacey and had never heard of the Evergreen Ballroom, to get some background. And the other was to write articles that would engage with people who had been there and to think back on those times. So I start with the person whose vision the Evergreen Ballroom was, and maybe even back up a little bit, his father. A man named Michael Scholand immigrated from Sweden, and he shows up on the 1900 census with his wife and 3 children. his wife and 5 children, 3 of whom were born in Sweden and 2 born in Washington. His occupation was listed as fisherman. And then his 3rd son, Walter Scholand, is the gentleman who built the Evergreen Ballroom. And he shows up again on a 1910 census as when he's 20 years old, and his occupation was listed as being a boom man at a logging camp. And the immigration date on the census said 1894, but the 4 was a little difficult to read because those were handwritten records that have been scanned. But Walter Scholand, the builder of the Evergreen Ballroom, he was born November 11th, 1889 in Sweden. And if that date sounds familiar at all, that is the state of Washington's birthday as well. And again, those sources, census records, accessible on Ancestry.com. Walter Scholand, again, Michael Scholand's son, Walter Scholand, builder of the Evergreen Ballroom, shows up again, 1920 census, this time in Thurston County. And over here on the left was the street that they lived on, Spring Street. And it shows his wife, Mary, their oldest son, Irving, and 2nd son, Ronald. His occupation was listed as engineer in a logging camp, Walter Scholand's was. And these records go, if you've looked at census records, there's a lot more details that flow off to the right, one of which is their occupation. Another little piece that kind of builds a picture, and they're just little pieces, but newspaper articles, newspapers included a lot more social events, who was visiting who was in from out of town, and even school events. And so a 1925 Olympian newspaper article reports a music recital, a teacher's name, and that students Ronald Scholand and Irving Scholand were performing, and it would say what they played and who the composer was. And in 1929, there was an article that listed the Washington School band roster, all of the students, and among them was Irving Scholand, so Walter Scholand's oldest son, and that he was playing the cornet. I also learned about that time period from the Peter Blecha article that Walter Scholand had been logging on Harstein Island, and that he was working as a carpenter and home builder in the Olympia area, and that he was also an aspiring violinist. 1930 census, Thurston County, shows the family again, and this time living on Wilson Street. It's way over there on the left, 517 Wilson. And now we can see Walter Scholand, his wife, and their 3 sons, Irving, Ronald, and Vernon, their center screen. And at the bottom down here would have been what you'd see far off to the right. And about 2/3 of the way down, he lists his occupation as musician now in an orchestra. So again, just a little glimpse of, yes, there's more to their family, I'm sure, in all their activities, but these are just the little bits that showed up looking back through newspapers. Dance halls and live music were happening already throughout Thurston County and seemed to be very popular. Little advertisements popping up everywhere. And here I just put them in this format instead of clipping all of the tiny, tiny ads. But so Walter Scholand has his own band. And they're advertised playing 1920 Freedom Hall on Yelm Road. Also 1920, the Legion Hall. Walter Scholand was on the music committee in that article. 1930, Scholand's orchestra is playing the Eagles Hall in January. In March, another social article advertising that dance and music at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Scholand, 517 Wilson Street, hosted by their sons, Irving and Ronald. And if it's about 1930, and this would have been early high school years, according to some evidence here coming up from their high school. So here they are, young teenagers hosting a music event at their house. And then in April, Schneider's Prairie Dance Hall out on Steamboat Island was featuring Schoen's orchestra playing music. And again, all these came from little box advertisements appearing in the newspaper. So the Olympian, sometimes the Daily Chronicle from Chehalis. The first photographs that I encountered were from a recently donated collection, and this was in May of 2021 when I started doing the research. And so I reached out to the Washington State Library, and they had just received the collection, and it didn't have an official cataloging title or anything yet, but they had a few. And some of them had dates and some did not. And there's a reason why. There was a question mark on the back of the photo. So it was labeled Mary, that was their mom, Irving, the oldest son, and then Ronald. But there was a question mark next to Irving. And the photos were undated, but the information indicated that it was apparent that they were originally separate and that someone had pasted them closer together for an album. And the spelling of their last name on the back of the photograph was spelled Shouland in this instance. These photographs here are from the Olympia High School yearbook archives, and Ronald and Irving, being close in age, were in the same graduating class, 1934. And then their younger brother in the graduating class of 1938. And the little captions that go with high school photographs indicated their involvement in music and in sports and social events. This information here is from a combination of sources, such as newspaper articles, an obituary article for oldest son, Irving Schoen. Born in Seattle, a graduate of Olympia High School, attended the University of Washington, played in the World War II 577th Army Band, manager of the Evergreen Ballroom, member of the American Federation of Musicians, and played in the American Legion Band and the Olympia Elks Lodge Orchestra. And that's that same photo from the high school yearbook. Likewise here, the information included was from a couple of different articles, including an obituary article. This would be Walter Schoen's second oldest son, Ronald, born in Quilcene. He was a paper boy for the Olympian, and there's a great photograph out there, 1928, of all the paper boys together for the Olympian. Graduated also Olympia High School and the University of Washington and UW Law School. I saw two different readings saying that one that he had been in the Army and another that he was in the Air Force. And I don't know if that ultimately meant that he had been in both or if one of those was off a bit. He practiced law in Olympia, was a justice of the peace. Their youngest son, again, Vernon Schoen, the information that I found on him was from some small social articles. Again, in 1944, there was an article indicating that he and his brother were home to visit their mom at Christmas time. And the other, from 1947, announced his recent graduation from MIT. So where was the Evergreen Ballroom? And I include this because I ran across many different descriptions of its location, and then it earned different addresses over time. Over the decades, things started to got different addresses. So I read that it was on Pacific Highway, I also saw another article that indicated it was on a section of Highway 99, and that section being the Olympia-Tacoma Highway. I also saw just Tacoma Highway on another. They had a box route address at one time, but now that parcel is at 9121 Pacific Avenue. It's also described as being on the kerosene circuit, which was a pathway of public houses as people traveled pre-electricity days, and they were lit by kerosene lamps. So as you travel from place to place, lit by kerosene lamps, it became the kerosene circuit. And just to kind of get the big picture, so here it is, where this red dot out there in Lacey, we got Olympia to the left and heading off into Pierce County there on the right. But I included this because it came up a number of times in articles that its location was important, being between Seattle and Portland. Bands that were traveling and playing in Portland and on their way to Seattle or vice versa, here's a place that they could also include on their trip. And then zooming in, here you can see Marvin Road coming down, and then you head out Pacific Avenue, and that white square is where the ballroom was. And this is from Google Earth as of last month. If you've been out Highway 510 on your way to Yelm and you pass the Chevron, then you've passed where the ballroom was. And this tannish square in the center, that's where the structure was. And now I believe it is a landscaping business on site. If we go back a little bit to 1996, on the Thurston County Assessor site, you can get to these GIS maps and you can look at your property. And you can go back, you can slide the aerial view back to 1996 and see how things changed over time. So this was the farthest back that I could go for an aerial view, at least on this source. So there you can see the length of the building, and that circle there, that's just a nice feature of GIS, tell you found your spot. But I believe from what I've read that was the manager's living quarters on the side. The ballroom was built in 1931. This advertisement from May announced their grand opening, and I thought it was interesting. They're calling it the Evergreen Pavilion in the beginning. And it's a small ad, but again, there's just some little details there. It's 7 miles east of Olympia on Tacoma Highway. Music was going to be from Walt Scholen's Evergreen Serenaders, an 11-piece orchestra. Supper was 35 cents, and admission was $1. And just a couple months later, there was a July 24th, 1931 article announcing an event. And the event was going to be the Olympia Cooks and Waiters Union, number 567. We're sponsoring a Hard Times Frolic on Saturday night. It was a costume event, and Scholen's dance band was playing the music. The description of what they were calling Walter Scholing's band kind of changed. There's serenaders, whether it was a music band, a dance band, an orchestra. I saw that fluctuate in the advertisements. So this is May 1931. In just 8 months later, in November, there's a fire. So not that much farther. This article goes on to describe how it was a $15,000 loss, that within a few hours the entire structure was burned to the ground, and that constructors, Walter Scholen and Emmett Brown, were undecided as to whether or not they would rebuild. I read that rumors circulated that the cause of the fire might have been arson from a local group that was disgruntled about the diversity playing at the ballroom. Following articles, April 1932, they discuss the insurance claim being filed. June 1932, an article comes out that the new dance hall is almost complete. So first opened in May, a fire in November, and then the following June, they're opening. And this is the advertisement from June 1932. The grand opening of the new Evergreen Colonial Ballroom. And Sholin's Evergreen Band. Way down here in the bottom corner, it says that gents are 75 cents and ladies are free. Following this, there was a July 4th celebration advertised. Admission went up to 80 cents, and the ladies were 10 cents at that event. Oops, let's see, was there? I might have went too quickly. No, I'll go back. Okay, this image here is from the Washington State Archives. And I wanted to point out the vegetation growing at the foundation level there, because the following picture doesn't have any of that, and this picture is undated, but the next picture we're going to see is dated 1933. But before I go on, you can take a look at the carport covers and the double doors in front of each one. Those living quarters off to the side, and there's a little stoop there. That's going to show up in a picture here in a moment. And we're going to get a description of just the dimensions, the data on the structure. So you can see the full length of that curved roof. And so this is the one that was dated 1933. Now, given how fast things grow in the Pacific Northwest, I'm not sure the time difference between that photo, this one, and the other one with the little trees and bushes and things like that. So photo dated August 14th, 1933, and that left to right, we're looking at Ronald Vernon and Irving Sholand. And again, this was from that collection that had been donated to the library in May of 2021. A little bit of a zoom in there just to see as best we can the entrance. And then from above, I know it's blurry. From above, you can see the carports and the roof and the living quarters. When I'm going to pass this article around, and could you kind of start that going? When the ballroom was set to open again, there was a lengthy article giving all the details about the dimensions and the decor inside. Some of those details could also be gathered from the Thurston County Assessor field book. So when you look at the property details, sometimes there's a PDF scan of older records from a property. And I'll show you a page from that here shortly. But it's a handwritten record, and it describes details about the building. So between that and this article, we learned that the building cost $15,000, and that included a dance hall, living quarters for a manager, a concession stand. It took 15 men to construct the hall over several weeks. A June 1932 article describes the location as, quote, a rural retreat with ample parking space in a woodland setting and quiet seclusion. The dimensions for the structure, 74 by 120 feet, including the largest maple ballroom dance floor in the county at 1,670 square feet. The field book indicated that there was a pier foundation, it was a barn class structure with a barrel roof, and that it was 8,800 square feet. The newspaper article that's making its way around tells of 140,000 square feet of lumber and plywood paneling. Local labor and local concerns, that phrase was used to describe hardware, plumbing, and electrical that all came from the local Montgomery wards. And the plywood came from Washington Veneer Company. And in the newspaper, there were ads from these companies, and that's what you're going to see on that photocopy going around. the advertisement would say Washington Veneer Company and say, plywood provided for the Evergreen Ballroom. And then the Montgomery Ward's ad, they're advertising themselves, but also the ballroom at the same time. The article describes special lighting to enhance the beauty of the place, an especially designed air system, an orchestra shell, so like a recessed area for the band, for Scholen's 9-piece band, is what came up in this article. Okay. Again, this is from that collection, and it's dated 1933, the Washington State Library collection. And if you kind of go from left to right there, it's probably a baby grand piano. I think a grand piano is a lot longer in that front part. So a baby grand piano, the bandstand fronts, kind of like these, but for a band. And then what looks like up in the top right-hand corner, a fire extinguisher. And then so you can see that the stage is raised, and there's that part of that 1,670 square feet of maple wood flooring. And here's a picture of the ballroom, also dated 1933. And again, starting on the left, it looks like that's where the orchestra alcove ends. You can see the shiny fire extinguisher, and then go around to wood paneling, and there's benches all along the edges. And you can see those most visibly by that far set of double doors. And there's the special lighting to enhance the beauty. And the ceiling, there's no description in any of the articles, but the ceiling looks like puffy fabric that's tie-dyed. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That little stoop that was to the right of one of the carports, I believe this is it. Again, among the Washington State Library collection, dated September 1933, and it said that this was Mary, Ronald, and Vernon. Same collection, 1933, September, and this is the west side looking east, I believe, in that living quarters. And so begins this era from about 1932 to 1946, when Walter Scholen passed away. This was the big band era, foxtrot dance crowd. Irving played the trumpet in the house band. Ronald played the clarinet and saxophone. Vernon was a drummer. So there's 3 sons are playing in their father's band. It's reported that Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers danced there. During this time period, Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington were there. And this ad off to the right is really just an example of what many of the little clips in the newspaper looked like. Sometimes there's a picture of who's going to play, sometimes not. Ads also looked a lot like this. And here now it says Irv Scholen instead of Walter Scholen. And when exactly that happened, I wonder, but I didn't read about. Perhaps it was kind of a overlap. Perhaps it was a definitive time. That did not come to light. Okay. And then the era of the 1950s and 60s, which, based on all the articles that I've read and people's reflections that I've read, gave the impression of being the most influential and the most memorable era of the ballroom, or having the longest lasting effect. That was the impression that I got from what I read. This is when big name bands were playing there before they became famous. I sensed from everything I read there was a lot of energy. And very significantly that up-and-coming bands could meet their idols, that they could play the same stage that their idols were playing. So kind of an indirect mentorship, perhaps. Meeting your idol, being in close proximity, sometimes interacting with them. So I was hearing that just kind of an education as well. If you were a young band and you were there to watch them and to meet them and to learn from them. When I spoke to Bill Englehart of Little Bill and the Blue Notes, he said we'd get there early and stand right next to it, meaning the stage. We couldn't get close enough, he said. Some of the local and regional bands, Bonnie Guitar from Seattle, Buck Owens from Tacoma, the Barons, the Wailers, just some of a few bands that, a few of the many who played there. And they were playing the same stage as the big names that they studied. Ray Charles, James Brown, Etta James, the Enchanters, the Capris, the Spinners, Ike and Tina Turner. In 1950, the Grand Ole Opry brought a new performer, Hank Williams, to the Evergreen Ballroom. A 1952 article reported that Louis Armstrong had just been there the previous March. And again, this is just a small list of what I've seen. And there's more. And there's more. So Little Richard, Johnny Cash, Glenn Campbell, Marty Robbins, some of the many. And they would let them play. It really stood out that these local and regional bands played the same stage. And as far as interactions, I read that Frank Roberts, a teenage saxophone player from Tacoma, spoke with Charlie Bird Parker. And according to Bletch's article on HistoryLink, Roberts told Parker what a genius Parker was, to which he responded, "There's no genius, there's only practice." I was getting advice. Little Bill and then the Blue Notes met Ray Charles. Bill Englehart got to share the stage with B.B. King. And so these younger bands are playing, and they're inviting the younger dance crowd as well. And so began a Sunday night series where minors were allowed. They couldn't exit and return, but it was their time. There was a sheriff deputy's wife, a Mrs. Van Allen, collecting tickets at the ticket booth on, I don't know if it was all those nights, but some of them. I interviewed Myrna Conine about dancing there, and I included her quote here that everybody loved to dance in those days. Everybody danced dances. You didn't just pick up your feet and put them down. And she said it was a really big deal to go, that everyone knew each other, and you danced until the last dance. This article from 2009, again, reflecting back on those days of younger bands playing the same stage, Kent Morrill was interviewed, and his group had put out a new album, and the album was covering some of the people who were influential from the Evergreen Ballroom. And he says, "We went out to the Evergreen Ballroom. We saw all these guys, even performed with them sometimes, when we were children practically. We weren't even supposed to be out there, but we were. Actually, almost everyone on this album was someone we saw at the Evergreen Ballroom." In speaking with Little Bill and the Blue Notes, Bill Englehart, he said that he encountered B.B. King and he was a real gentleman, that he had seen Ike and Tina Turner there and James Brown, and that Irv Scholling asked their band if they wanted to work Saturday nights. And he told me about how he learned of the Evergreen Ballroom. And it is in one of the Thurston Talk articles. But he says, "We would never have known about the Evergreen Ballroom except that we used to hang out at a record store on Lower Broadway in Tacoma, and they let us play all the records. I'm not sure which one of us, but one of us saw this poster on the wall that said the Evergreen Ballroom and a date and who would be playing there. And I thought, my God, what is this? I asked if it was an Olympia, and he said, yeah, you'd like it out there. They bring in all the good groups. That's how we found out about the place. So that's how he learned. And so this maybe it looked like this. I'm not sure. But it made me think of this poster from the Washington State Historical Society. Maybe you saw a poster like that on the record store wall. And he shared with me observing James Brown, because he indicated that, again, they're watching these performers and who are their idols. So he said, James Brown was an amazing performer, always had a great band. In fact, his band was like 10 pieces. We'd never seen him in person, and there he was. He had a song, Please, Please. And he would go, please, please. And then he fell on the floor, just fell on the floor. And everybody looked. We thought, my God, what's happening here? A couple of guys from his group came over and picked him up and walked him off the stage. He had his head down and sobbed, please, please. We were just completely blown away. He got clear over to one side of the ballroom, and all of a sudden it was real quiet. And then we heard him again, please, please. He was crawling back across the floor on his hands and knees with these two guys behind him. One had a cape over him. It was the most dramatic thing I'd ever seen in my life. That was really great to hear him tell that story. And then going on through the 50s up through 1964, 65, again, little articles mention the Evergreen Ballroom. The parking lot was expanded, and the Olympian said that was a sign of growth for Hawks Prairie. The parking lot was expanded. Occasionally, in some of the advertisements of who was playing, it would be advertised that Irv Scholand arranged a shuttle from the Olympia Greyhound station and a stop in Tacoma as well to bring people out to the ballroom. 1953, there's a few articles about the Evergreen Ballroom bowling team, a ladies' league, and playing at Adams Alley. Again, Duke Ellington and his orchestra show up in advertisements. Jimmy Ramos singing on a Saturday night, and they're giving away television sets. 1955, an article from the Daily Chronicle talks about a petition or a rewriting of an ordinance, perhaps, of making it possible for the ballroom to stay open later. And it says the Thurston County Commission asked for an amendment to extend the 1 a.m. closing to 2 a.m. And present for that, Irv Scholand of the Evergreen Ballroom, Ray Walker of the Musicians Union, and Leo Smith from the Tropics. And they claimed that a 2 a.m. closing was necessary because in Pierce County and Grays Harbor County, there was no mandatory closing time at all. So they wanted to be able to compete with attendance. 1957, the ballroom celebrates its 25th anniversary. A little article reported that there would be a celebration and that Mary Erickson, she's Mary Erickson now, because in 1946, Walter Scholand passed away. And so Mary Scholand remarried, and she's Mary Erickson. And her oldest son, Irving, were managing the ballroom. And so they were to have a specially decorated cake for the anniversary. 1957 also stood out in an article I read on the Louie Louie Report. The website is louielouie.net. And it mentioned that the Evergreen Ballroom was an important location in song history because it was the first place that Richard Berry performed the song Louie Louie in the Northwest. And it was on a tour in 1957 along with Bobby Bland, Junior Parker, and Etta James. 1958, Johnny Cash comes to the Evergreen Ballroom. He had just released his song that January of The Ballad of a Teenage Queen. So they're going to have a Johnny Cash Teenage Queen dance and show. The dancers were judged throughout the evening by a panel of judges. The prize was $50 and dinner with Johnny Cash. Now, I didn't find a name, but apparently someone did take a picture of the winner, and Johnny Cash kissed her. And I read some of that from the Olympian, the Daily Chronicle, and the interview with Steve Bean, who worked for KGY at that time. And his job was to bring all the heavy recording equipment. Bring a couple of people with him, grab all the equipment, reel-to-reel recording equipment and big microphones, record the show that night, and then go back to KGY and play it at midnight. And I did ask if there were recordings, but not as of yet. 1961, the Wailers play the Evergreen Ballroom. The last owner, Fawn Morcus, indicated in an article that he had a 7-foot-high promotional poster of Sonny and Cher playing at the ballroom. It might have been 1963. 1961, a new policy was instituted that attendees must be 21 and over on Saturday nights. In 1963, Irving Scholin passes away. And in June, he passed away in June of '63, survived by his brothers Ronald and Vernon and their mother. And now Mary and her husband Elmer Erickson managed the ballroom. 1965, they sell the Evergreen Ballroom to Richard Campbell, who continued seeking local bands as well as big names. Some local names that came up were the Statics from Burien, the Dynamics, and the Viceroys from Seattle. Glenn Campbell, backed up by a regional band, the Page Boys from Moses Lake. 1966, Ike and Tina Turner. That's another one I was going to pass around. Just a sample of one of the posters. Ike and Tina Turner play the Evergreen Ballroom. They just married a few years before, and then a few years after the Evergreen Ballroom, they're touring with the Rolling Stones, and they win a Grammy, 1971, and eventually inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There's an image of a ticket for the ballroom. This was shared courtesy of Peter Bleccia. And this was for the Bards in 1966. I also saw a picture of a 1930s dance card from the Evergreen Ballroom online on the Pacific Northwest Band's website, and that was a very interesting piece to see. So more local bands under Campbell's management and Top 40, the Kingsmen, Paul Revere and the Raiders, the Bards, the Rascals, Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels, and in this time, the freeway, I-5, is now complete, and that's affecting the secondary highway. And so more and more traffic is on the freeway and not so much out on the 2-lane highways. So all these things are happening, and all these people are going, and all these bands are there. You wonder, where are the photographs? I did not see photographs. My only conclusion is that people are having too good of a time to remember to bring the 35 millimeter and the 110, and they didn't go along. But now, it's not like today, snapping photos and sharing them on social media. But there were a few articles of things happening that kind of brought in some of those time periods to tell you, give you a visual. There was some vehicle prowl reports in the newspaper. And one of them from 1970 said that among the pilfered are an 8-track stereo tape deck and 16 tapes, a suede coat, an Olympia department store credit card. And another report indicated that someone's camel hair coat had been taken from their vehicle. Those things just kind of created an image of another time period. But there were posters. And this is just kind of an example of a common layout of the posters. Just a couple of different colors, maybe an image. This one's Jerry Lee Lewis. The Lacey Museum has four posters, I think. This is one of them. It's a Washington State Guard benefit dance, it looks like. Admission 75 cents. These are also in the Lacey Museum collection. George Shearing, Jimmy Wakely, Henry Bussey. Okay, very colorful. There are snapshots of the posters that were hanging in the Evergreen Ballroom. And according to a later article, they were taken by Mike Shea the night before the fire. He'd played in a band there and had heard that the posters were being sold, and so wanted to take some snapshots of them. And so these are on, not very clear here, unfortunately. I think someone took them from down below, looking up. But these were the posters on the wall at the Evergreen Ballroom. And these are on louislouis.net. So because of the cultural variety in music and how all these people are drawn together and in such a unique way, this stood out to Ken Balsley, my first interview person when I started the article series for Thurston Talk. And this quote is in one of those articles, and he said, "The Evergreen Ballroom booked some of the top Black performing groups in the country, exposing local residents to different types of Black culture. It also attracted Black soldiers from Fort Lewis. In that respect, no activity or organization had such an impact on the diversity of Thurston County than did Evergreen." Okay. And Ken Balsley was also a member of the Thurston County Historic Commission, and again had an interest in having a physical plaque to recognize the site of the Evergreen Ballroom. So as time goes on, 1970, Mary Erickson passes away. Articles kind of sparse out. There's a few in the 80s reflecting back on Highway 99. Local taverns that used to be a big deal. Dance lessons are advertised here and there. A couple of the articles said it was built in 1919. An article in June 2000, so a month before the Evergreen Ballroom burned down, there was another article, people sharing their memories, and someone said they remembered sharing a drink in the parking lot with B.B. King, and another person shared that they got let in the side door to meet Glenn Campbell. This is an image from the Thurston County Assessor Field Book. It just lists some of the owners of the property. It doesn't list anyone before 1973, and then lists the last owner here, Fawn Marcus, at the end. And I read in one of the articles that the nickname, the Green, came from owner Mel Carter. So in those later years, who was playing there? Names such as American Eagle, Super Band, Pitch Blend, Michael Martin Murphy, Creedence Clearwater Revisited. And then under Fawn Marcus, he booked bands such as Foghat, Patty Loveless, Blue Oyster Cult, Quiet Riot, Starship, and Dr. Hook. And that the last owner, the article described Fawn Marcus as playing live music and then kind of switching to DJ dance club music, but then switching back to a live venue also. And that some of the dance floor space had given way to pool table space and restaurant space. And then July 20th, 2000, and this came from an article in an Anchorage, Alaska newspaper. So news spread far when this happened, and it indicated that the first call came in at 3:20 p.m. People inside playing pool had reported smoke, and that 45 minutes later it had collapsed, and that it had spread to a 5-acre grass fire. So 35 to 40 firefighters on scene, Lacey Fire Department responding, and these photos are from the Lacey Fire Department. Olympia Fire, North Olympia, South Bay, East Olympia, and a Department of Natural Resources team. There's another one from across the street. One showing the front, one of those carport entrances there. And this is the GIS map, an aerial view in 2003. So nothing was happening, and you can still see where it stood. And some of those little diamond-shaped little decors around there, and where the main building was. And again, what it looks like in 2024. The memories that people shared, the first place I saw them was on the Pacific Northwest Band's website, and I could just really sense again that the energy and the sentiment behind what people shared. And so here was this new medium, internet and then social media. Each article that came out with Thurston Talk, and they put it on Facebook, lots of people were compelled to share their thoughts and their memories. And it was really, really neat to hear them, because I wish I could have gone there, and I wish I could have met more and more people and heard more of those stories. So I have a few of them here that just kind of represent multiples. Drove down from Tacoma, from Fort Lewis, stopped by before fishing trips, down from Shelton, took dancing lessons. We went there as teenagers in the 1950s. I saw Ike and Tina Turner. I met my husband there. Oops. There we go. This one. My parents thought it was a den of iniquity and forbade my sister and I from going there. I think they feared we would meet soldiers from Fort Lewis who would sweep us off our feet. We went anyway. So many great memories at the Evergreen in the 60s, where my aunt worked in the bar and my cousins and I danced up a storm, and we'd stay after to help clean up and meet the bands. Learned to line dance there, Saturday night dancing and karaoke in the bar. They had good food. Was devastated when she burnt to the ground. And these are from, like I said, Facebook posts, people sharing after the articles went out. Marnie says, my parents never missed a night dancing there in the 1950s. I remember thinking how handsome my dad was and how beautiful my mom when they were dressed to dance at the Evergreen. Met my wife there. After it burned down one year for our anniversary, I set up a table with food and drink and surprised her with dinner and dancing, even though it was just the concrete. My God, we had so much fun. We danced and talked all night. So it was popular and memorable right down to the concrete. And speaking of, this retaining wall is built from the concrete foundation that had been broken up later and stacked. And I learned of this from one of the Facebook posts, and I reached out to the person who had them. So he shared this photograph, and he said he didn't know until he was collecting it and was told where it was from. And it really made an impression on him that all this history happened on top of this dance floor, this foundation, and he was moving it along. And that commemorative plaque that Ken Balsley was interested in will come to fruition. This is a panel that is destined to be on a kiosk at the Lacey Rack. So down around the corner at Marvin and Stillicum, in the main parking area, I think it's by the playground. The structure is there, and the panels will be soon, and the Evergreen Ballroom is commemorated on one of those panels. The research I wish I could have gathered for you was I wish I could have been there. I wish I could have gone to the Evergreen Ballroom and watched and just, sensed that energy and got to see what everybody else did. But I'm very glad that I got to speak with the people that I did and learn all that I have. So I must say thank you to the Washington State Archives, the Lacey Fire Department, the State Library and Historical Society, Peter Blecha and Eric Prettle, David Faro, and the Thurston County Historic Commission for sharing the kiosk image. Phone interviews with Bill Englehart, conversation with Dick Poost and Steve Bean and Myrna Conine. To the late Sam Carlson for creating the Pacific Northwest Band's website, and to his family for keeping that going. And thank you to the Lacey Museum for the opportunity to share the research. And thank you to Ken Balsley and Thurston Talk for starting the journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rebecca. We're now going to accept some questions from the audience in person and online. So, okay, I'll do my best to make my way around.
Yeah, great presentation. Thank you for doing all the work.
Thank you.
In your travels through all the articles, did you ever hear about a local band called the Corvettes?
I believe so.
The drummer was Walt Bowen, and the lead singer was County Commissioner George Barner Jr.
Yes, does very much
Unfortunately,
sound familiar.
his home fire eliminated some 50 posters that he had collected over the years from the Evergreen. And it's a big loss. I'm glad you had some. That's wonderful.
Yes.
We're just going to alternate between the online and in person, so I'll come back to you next, if that's okay. Thank you.
What was the capacity at the ballroom?
I did not read a capacity number, but one article gave the description of an estimated 800. It was the description in an article, but I did not see a specific capacity.
Thank you. Maybe you know what this is. I don't know. One of the posters said, "No jeans and no pedal pushers." Does anybody in the crowd have an idea what that was? Or maybe we can't say it. Okay. Thank you.
All the ladies with free tickets.
Anybody want to comment on that?
Was there a dress code? Oh. The microphone.
It mentioned the food was available, but was there a bar, or was it bring your own?
There was a bar later. I don't believe that there was a bar in the very, very beginning. I didn't hear that there was a bar in the beginning, but I heard references to a bar later as time went on. Yeah.
We have some time for in person. We'll go next.
I played at the Evergreen many times. The first time, I had just joined the musician union. I was 15 years old. And I got a call. They said there was a band out there that their drummer was sick. So we loaded the drums in my dad's car, took me out there. One of the bands you mentioned was the Statics. Well, back in those days, it was Tiny Tony, Mara Lee, and the Statics. So it was Mara Lee Rush, Angel of the Morning. And here's this 15-year-old kid with I was scared to death. Many years later, there was a flood down in Lewis County, and we put on a benefit to raise some money for some of the folks there. And Mara Lee showed up. And I asked her, I said, "You remember about 50 years ago when this little kid showed up to play drums for him?" Yep. The other thing, part of the time I was the business agent for the musicians union. And when bands would come through, I'd have to go out and make sure they had their union cards and all that kind of stuff. So Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels were out there. And I show up in my blue leisure suit and walk back in the band dressing room and said, "Which one of you guys is Mitch Miller?"
Hey, wow, I was going to ask you, did you bring your harmonic? Oh, yeah. Play us a tune. Listen to this.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We appreciate it. And somebody over here? Yeah.
Well, when we did the research on the book Blacks in Thurston County from 1950 to 1975, a number of people who were interviewed talked about seeing a lot of these famous people at the Evergreen Ballroom. And last year for Black History Month, the theme was African Americans and the arts. And so we've been looking for some connection to a lot of those famous Black artists that appeared at the Evergreen Ballroom from the 50s on through. And a number of the people had actually attended some of those concerts. And, you know, it was fascinating for us to hear them talk about, oh, we saw Ray Charles there. Oh, we saw Bobby Blue Bland. Oh, Little Richard, you know, where out at that Evergreen Ballroom. But of course, by then it was gone. And it was just a historical reference for people. So we're very interested in any of those posters you have that we might share, because we are again putting together our Black History Museum, and the Black entertainers are a part of that. And people find it very fascinating that some of the famous Black artists and musicians that we know about had no idea that they ever set foot in Lacey, Washington.
Thank you. Okay.
Well, I went to the Evergreen Ballroom in 1966 as a first-year Tacoma General Hospital School of Nursing student, and one of my fellow new students was a Chinese-American young woman, and we became friends. And so one night, she and one of her Chinese-American, guys that she knew, and then another white guy that was a friend of his, we went down to the ballroom, Evergreen Ballroom, in 1966. Now think about the milieu in 1966 from Fort Lewis. And we went there and we were all dancing and having a good time. And I can't tell you how many times guys came up to us and made very nasty, racist comments, and I will not use the words they used, and which sort of put a real damper on our evening. And that was because of Vietnam. And a lot of Fort Lewis folks were probably there. And so they felt emboldened to come up and tell us, why aren't you dancing with white guys here? Why did you come with these blank? And so we actually left earlier than we had intended and drove back to nursing school. And of course we had to be in by midnight anyway, or the house mother would have got us. But anyway, that was sort of I think back on that, it was an interesting experience. At the time, it was upsetting.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we have an online question, and then we'll come back to the audience.
Yes, so what was the price for couples tickets? Did they have couples tickets?
I didn't see anything that mentioned couples tickets. Often on the advertisements, it would say admission, and then it would say ladies free. Or it would say gents and ladies. Mm-hmm.
Okay, somebody in, yeah.
I remember three things. There were three things I remember. I danced out there with my wife and loved it. I remembered Lyle because he was playing music then, great country music. Listened to him out there and listened to him down at the Red Barn. We'd go down there dancing and stuff. But one of the other things I remember is I was also a firefighter. And we used to inspect that building. And the way that building was constructed, we were told if this thing ever catches on fire, there's not going to be any putting it out. Because it was what they call balloon construction. You know what that is? Where the 2x4s, the studs that go up like this. They don't have any boards in between. So when the fire gets in those walls, there's no stopping it. And it was, I mean, once that thing started burning, I mean, people were pretty aware that it was not going to be a good ending.
Were you part of the fire team that went to put it out?
I'm sorry?
Were you part of the fire team?
I wasn't in town when that happened. But the guy that I'm having breakfast with tomorrow was in charge of that particular fire, yeah.
Oh, wow. Anyone else? Okay.
Thank you. My name's Harold Jones. My family settled in the area in 1964 in a little development off of Marvin Road called Evergreen Estates. And our neighbors right across the street, there was a young man who was about 5 or 6 years old. His name was Mike Smith. And when the Smith family moved, his dad was a pretty famous home builder in the area, Merv Smith, heck of a guy, heck of a character. When they sold their home across the street from us and moved, they bought a place right across the street from the Evergreen Ballroom. It was like a small family farm with cattle and things like that. So this is the first time I've seen Mike since probably about 19... Yeah, about 19, okay, fair enough. But another thing I want to touch on, I did attend and go out to the Evergreen Ballroom on many occasions. And I saw on one of the clips you had a thing where you had to be 21 to get in or drink. No, that wasn't the case. They didn't care. And the thing I remember about the interior was they had a stage on each side of the building, so they could alternate bands without losing any of the music or time like that. But one of the things I think was understated in the presentation was a local celebrity by the name of Fawn Marcus. And those of you who may have heard of him or may not, Fawn was from France. He was a percussionist, and he had a local band here called the Phonics. They were pretty popular. He had dancing girls. And on a side note, I ran into Fawn at Costco in Lacey about probably 5 or 6 years ago, eating his hot dog with one of his bandmates. And if you don't know, Fawn, last time I saw Fawn, I hope he's still alive. Is he okay? But he's got that wrecking yard on top of old Nisqually there, on top of the hill. And I guess you could probably run into him there any day, but looked the same, hasn't changed, just a lot of years older.
Yeah.
So.
At the senior center in Lacey.
Oh, do you? Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Yep. Yep, of course.
But I will. I don't know if anybody here ever knew that Fawn Marcus had a reunion at the dance. Oh, I don't. Is anyone here that went to the reunion that Fawn Marcus had at the ballroom about 20 years ago? It was Fawn Marcus put it on himself, and I can't remember the name of the people. I've got some. Actually a signed list of all the people that were there and everything, but I just couldn't find it. And it was about 20 years ago, and I think there was about 30, 35 people there, and he was trying to figure out a way to raise money to restore the place or something, get it going again at that time, and that's what he called a little reunion for. And we had food there, and all sat around and visited, but I don't really know how. There was a man that had a paint shop on the Little Rock Road, and his wife worked at Beltone Hearing. He painted a lot of kids' cars down there in Little Rock Road. He painted about 2 or 3 cars for my husband.
Bernie.
What was his name?
Bernie.
No, that was Black Lake Boulevard. This was on the Little Rock Road.
Little Rock.
Anyhow, his wife was being, I guess you could say, organizing it for Fawn Marcus. And I worked just down the street from her for office supplies from this man's wife. And she got to talking to me about it. And so I started doing some mailing out and things like that for her. Secretary, I guess you could say. I was her secretary. And I have the paperwork with all the people who signed their names, but I would thought maybe someone here would have gone to that besides my husband and I and a few of our friends were there. Not so. Yeah. I need to find that, don't I?
Thank you so much. Okay, just one more. I think, yeah.
Just a real quick, the day that the Evergreen Ballroom burned down, my husband and I, we owned a cafe out on the top of the Nisqually Hill. And Fawn came in right after he was pretty emotional. And he's a resilient man. And another thing is in one of the pictures, I don't know if I'm right in my memory or not, but the sign that was above one of the doors that says, "Come as you are," I think that might have been on one of the awnings at Lee's Steakhouse. I don't know if anybody else remembers the signage, the Colonel Sanders. It was one of the first Kentucky Fried Chickens, and it was a hot place to dance too.
I didn't notice
Thank you.
Elvis Presley picture in any of the pictures, but I remember there was an Elvis Presley picture as you were going.
Oh, really?
That he had played there.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody remember that?
I don't recall that.
Well, sounds fun. Well, thank you everyone so much for sharing. I guess we could really stay here all night talking, but unfortunately we do have to close now. But just a reminder, and we'll put it back on the screen, the email address. Please feel free to email us with your experiences and stories if you want to. We would love to read them. I'm not sure exactly what it looks like right now, but we would like to include them in our exhibit somehow. So yeah, if you would like to do that, we would appreciate that, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you again, Rebecca, so much for your fantastic talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate we learned a lot. And I hope everyone, you will be able to join us next month. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the evening.